Hinchjay, hello, in one of the oldest languages ever spoken in this land. My name is Jim Sawgrass. I'm a descendant of the Muskogee people, a living historian, and I'm dressed from 200 years ago. And today, I'd like to take you back in time and share with you some of the things that I've learned growing up. Let's go back and see how our native people lived for thousands of years. Let's make fire the old way. Today I'm going to be using a bow drill. This is a rib bone of an animal like a buffalo or bison. The string here is deer skin leather. It's loose so it can wrap around a stick. This can also be a way of drilling, but today we're going to make fire this way. As I push down on that stick with this piece of wood block, everything just right, maybe we'll make fire. Here we go. Ready? Let's see if we can do it. Always have your nest ready. Pine needles, moss, even the cattail fluff. Let's go get the fire started. Once we got our fire started, now it's time to do some cooking. When native people went into the forest and gathered wood for their fires, it wasn't chopping trees down. That stuff won't burn anyways, it's green. So they would find dead wood. When they got it back to their village, they did not chop it up like this and split it. That's for stoves and fireplaces. Our fire pits and stoves were basically made of rocks. Up in the northern territories where the mountains are, slate rock, sandstones were used to build rock ovens just like the one I've got here. the wood that they brought back, instead of chopping it and wasting our energy, they would just push it into the fire and let the fire just burn it down as it went. If I want more fire, I push in a log. If I want less, I back one out. They made all kinds of implements with the things of nature. Long before metal tools, forked sticks, which we'll be cooking on today, and of course those coals up under there get that rock really hot. We're going to put a little bit of oil. In the old days, this could be animal fat or oils from the nuts and things that they would have gathered. Little tools. We'll get our rock good and hot so we can cook on it today. Today I'll be chopping up some of these and putting them on this rock and just cooking them up. We'll have a feast later. One of the old ways of cooking meat. A lot of times they just threw it right on the coals and some of the edges burned up, of course. But then they learned to make forked sticks, and these forked sticks could control the heat by moving it away or putting it closer. And so it was a lot better than throwing it right in the coals. And so today I'll be slowly cooking these steaks by roasting them, and just make sure I keep turning them, keep my eye on them. Smoking the meat on the fire, well, that smoke gives it a good flavor, especially if you use the right kind of wood, like oak or hickory or nut woods or orange citrus wood. Never use pine though. That's bad for your cooking. When the Spaniards arrived in the South, they saw Native Americans smoking meat on smoke racks over the fire. They'd never seen that before. Where they were from, they salted the meat. That kept it from rotting. But when they saw the natives smoking the meat and it gave it such a good flavor, they took a word from one of the native tribes they had met in the islands of Puerto Rico, a Taínos tribe, and they took that word barbacoa, and that's how our modern day barbecue came from, was that word, and the Spanish calling it that. And so barbecue. And smoking that meat is still the best way of cooking it there is. Drying the food, well, long ago there was no refrigerators. So the food had to be dried if you wanted to make it last a long time. They would take the corn, the beans, the squash, the berries, whatever they had, their food that they grew in their gardens. And during the fall of the year, they would start drying it in the sun. Let the sun dry it hard, and then you can store it away in gourd containers, which we would use for storage. This would get us through the winter until the summertime when the new garden puts out our fresh food again. Native Americans in the southern and eastern United States were farmers. Long before the arrival of Europeans, corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, sunflowers, strawberries, just to name a few of them, were being grown in our villages using implements and tools, just like the ones I've got here made out of shell and made out of rock. And this would have been farming tools way, way before John Deere came around with his tractor. And so we were farming the land. Imagine having to use a turtle shell for your plate tonight, or maybe a drinking cup made of a seashell. And all the implements and things that you use for cooking had to be made from what nature gave you, like clay to make pottery, or wood to make bowls and spoons, and tools for farming, just like you see here, for planting our crops of corn, beans, squash, potatoes. Many foods we eat today are foods that came from natives. Another way of cooking was to use clay pots. As a matter of fact, the oldest clay cooking pots of the United States are found in the south along Georgia's coast and Florida's coast, along the St. Johns River area. The clay pots, ideas probably being brought from other tribes trading, but they started taking the clay, they would shape it, then they would dry it like this in the sun and bake it in the fire. A lot of times a wooden paddle would be used to make intricate marks while the clay was still wet, leaving the marked pottery. Sometimes they use their sticks or fingernails to do the marks, but marking that pottery. The oldest clay pots, again, of the United States are found here in the southern United States among the Muskogean people. Weaving. It's one of the oldest arts that there is, almost as old as breaking rocks. They took bark, they took grasses, and they even took moss, and they learned to weave it. Here's some rope made of moss. Here's some rope made out of the bark. Or how about the grass known as yucca? Yeah, you don't want to eat that. Tastes kind of yucca. But that's how people made their ropes. And then they learned to weave them and make pockets to hold things and pouches. They learned to make baskets from weaving. Some baskets were made of coiled ropes. Some baskets were made of coiled grasses and pine needles and split river cane. Here's one made out of cane and pine needles. How about one with color, like the paint I'm wearing today? Using dyes and paints, we could mark and make different colors on the baskets. That's a pine needle basket. It doesn't stop there. They get real small. Look at those guys. But that's not the real little ones. Check out these little baskets. No, they're not a picnic basket. You couldn't keep nothing in there but a few crumbs. These are actually girls' earrings. And they're worn and made by natives long ago and still today. And so learning to weave was one of the old arts that people did all over the world, especially here in the South. Native people all over the eastern United States were fishing, lived by water. The creeks did. That's why English called them the creeks. I have one of the fish traps that they would have used along the rivers and creeks. This is made out of grapevines, and it's only a small version of the real trap, but this would be taken down to a river, and it would be set where the water flows right into it. They would take a bunch of rocks and build walls along the river, which guided the fish from one side or the other side, and it led them right into the trap. When the fish go inside here, there are sharp spikes right here, facing inward. And now when the fish come out, the spikes are looking right into their eyeballs, so it keeps the fish in. When I'm ready to take the fish out of here, I can untie the basket, the inner basket, open it up, and dump out the fish. Another way to catch a fish was to use a spear. A lot of times in a dugout canoe, a tall pole would be used to pole your way through the swamp. Again, this is a small canoe, maybe for a child. A large canoe would be about 30 foot long and be very heavy to use with a paddle. So the pole would be a lot better. At the other end of the pole is a spearhead. And if I see a big fish swimming by, I can take that spearhead and I can spear him. And as soon as I do, that spearhead will stick into the fish, and the barbs right there, they keep that fish, keep that spear inside that fish. And he takes off fighting, trying to get away. If I start pulling on this rope too early, it'll rip out. He's full of fight. But I'll let that fish keep on swimming, because everywhere the fish goes, the float goes. And that float follows the fish until he's worn out, too tired, then it just sits there in the water until I come pick it up. That's when you pull your fish in. Another way to catch a fish might be the way that you do it, using a hook. This first hook you're about to see is one that I carved out of a piece of shell. I put some deer hair on there to disguise it to look like a bug in the water. Another fish hook I've got here is carved out of an alligator bone. A lot of times we didn't use a fishing pole, simply a long string tied to a branch of a tree. Throw this in the water with the bait on it, leave it there, and maybe when you get back there'll be a fish on there. Check out this fish hook. It's carved out of a bone from a deer's toe. The string is made of yucca or grass. The shell acts as a sinker, and the corn cob, well, it acts as a float. And so this is a fishing rig, and look at all the different hooks we've got here. Some of them were real simple, just a thorn, a sharp thorn. Shells, whether we blow them to signal with, like this blowing horn, or whether we use them to make jewelry or tools. That's a farming tool, and there's your tomahawks and scrapers made out of shells. The jewelry that was made was a lot of times known as wampum by many of the tribes. Drilling a hole in the shell and marking it was not easy. If you want to make beads, make them valuable, use shells. This drill is known as a pump drill, used to drill the holes in the shells. The drill bit in this case is made to come off. The drill bit made out of flint inserts into the piece of river cane, and that's how the drills worked back then. If I want to mark on the shell, I might use something like this beaver's jaw. This beaver's tooth is very tough. Hold it just as a person would hold a pencil, and over, hour after hour, they would scratch and they would mark things on these shells. The markings on these shells would tell what a person's job in the village was. Maybe you're a weatherman. Maybe you're a keeper of the fire. The shell told what your job was. And when you wore that, people would know. Breaking rocks. For thousands of years, people all over the world broke rocks to make their tools and to make their weapons. The art of breaking rocks is known today as flint knapping. Flint being one of the main rocks used, and knapping meaning to break it. Whether I use a hammer stone, or maybe I put my stone on the end of a handle, and I make a hammer that I can swing on a big boulder and bust it down into pieces easier to carry back to the village. They would go to these quarry sites and they would bring back the proper rocks that they could use to make the tools that were needed. The flint knappers would spend hours a day just sitting there learning how to hit that rock just right so they could break it. Look at that piece just come off there. You see that? Just hitting it just right, and you can break that rock the way you want it. Maybe this will be a new gardening tool. Well, or maybe a tomahawk head like this one right here, made out of flint. All we have to do now is add a handle. Axes like this would be used for building a canoe. But listen, if I start chopping on wood with this would break. And so we would first burn the wood and then we would chop it. But stone tools, they go back thousands of years. Flint knapping, breaking that rock, whether I use a rock to do it or the antler of a deer for knapping it. This pushing on the edge here flakes off little pieces. And I can shape it the way I want it to be. See that? Using that antler of a deer, pushing on that rock, I can shape it, I can sharpen it, if it breaks, I can reshape it. And that's how they would make their tools that they needed, whether it be knives, arrowheads, spearheads, tomahawks, breaking rocks. This one's a real old one. It's 2,000 years old estimated, made by a person and using that same method of antlers and breaking the rocks. Those blades would then be added to handles. These knives are made with deer antlers. There's the crown of the antler, there's the tip of the antler, and tying them to the animal's tendons used as string. Animal's tendon a lot of times is used as string. That's a tendon from the back of a deer. After we've put the tendon on it, a lot of times we'll take tree sap glue. Now this is the sap of a pine tree mixed with some ground up charcoal from the fire with heat, and it fuses the two together, making a liquid glue, very hot, When it's dumped on something, it dries, and this is very hard. This is not moving, it's not coming out, and it's in there, making a resin glue and the tendons of the deer for tying. This one's a coyote jawbone glued in, a piece of flint. Yeah. About a deer's leg bone, holding a piece of coral. There's my favorite, the jawbone of an alligator, and holding a piece of coral, making a nice dagger. War clubs. They were some of the earliest weapons of man. Sticks for striking, sticks for beating. Many of the Muscodian people were known to carry red war clubs, reddened with the blood of the enemies. Check this one out. I like to call it a noggin knocker. Here's one that a dancer might carry when dancing. Of course, this would be after that animal brought by the Spanish, the horse. But some of our war clubs were made of the stalks of broken guns. Some of them had sharp, jagged edges carved in them. But it was that blunt force, the strike of a war club, which was our earliest weapon. People began adding things like rocks, shells, and other things. The next weapon, of course, was the spear. The first spears of man were stabbing sticks, sharpened by scraping it on the rocks and heating it into the fire. And then as time went on and people learned to break rocks, they made those rocks so they came apart, just like that. That's how the first spear was. They probably tied it onto a bone of an animal that was hollow that fit on the end of the stick. And when one person did it, the rest of the people said, why didn't I think of that? And they did it too, because that was better than that. As time went on, spears were made pretty much the same all around the world for stabbing. But then when people learned to throw a spear, they stopped making it big, giant, heavy, and they started making it better for flying in the sky, like the next spear I have right here. This spear goes to a new time of the archaic times, where the old spear was paleo. Throwing an arrow, this is lightweight river cane, which grew in the southeast. Long before bamboo was brought here from the Spanish, we had river cane. The feathers of the birds, like the turkey feathers that I'm wearing here in my hair, also make arrows fly nice and straight by putting them on the back. The way these feathers are put will cause the arrow to spin the way they're tied on here. And this is where the idea of bullets spinning from guns will come from later in history. The arrow point was a lot smaller. Now that it's going to be flying in the air, we made it so it came off. When this hits the animal sticks, this fell to the ground. The hunter could pick this up and in his pouch have more of these, and he could use the same spear over again. If I throw the spear, it's better than getting up and stabbing. And so this is a lot better. Now, if I throw it as hard as I can, it won't go real far. But if I want it to go far, I can make my arm longer using the addle, the throwing stick. The addle was used by people all over the world during the archaic time to make their arms longer for throwing the spear. As time went on, they made them better. They carved on the wood. They made it thin so it would bend. And if it would bend, it was better than the one that wouldn't bend. And so they did that. They carved them thin. They even tied rocks on the back. But by bending a piece of wood would lead to the next invention, the bow. My bow is made of hickory wood. The string is the skin of a squirrel. We would twist that squirrel skin with another one, make our bowstring. These bows were long bows that the person carried here in the South, and we had a number of different arrows. When the bow became the new weapon at the end of the Ice Age, the animals that they were hunting were no longer big, giant, woolly mammoths. They were now the deer and the bear and the buffalo. The arrows got small. They made the arrows, instead of coming apart, tied together. Now you can carry a whole bunch of arrows, all ready to go. My quiver is made from the skin of an alligator garfish. As a matter of fact, this arrowhead is made of the scale of a garfish. We made them out of shark's teeth. We made them out of coral and flint rocks. We made them out of bone and sometimes even wood and shells. And so arrowheads were tied on. When the bow was invented, all over the world, the woodland era, people became farmers, building bigger villages, staying in one spot, not following the big animals. Now they became more of tribesmen, farmers, and staying in large villages. Well, this display represents children's toys. No, you don't see any skateboards and Nintendos here in this table, but we do have Barbie's grandma and Ken's grandpa, and even baby Barbie. Dolls taught the girls basically how to take care of children. Since they were the givers of life, they were going to take care of those children, and making things the dolls might need, like clay pots, little baskets, little houses, taught the girls how to take care of a home and make the things that the home needed. They learned to make the pottery, the weaving. They even learned to do the sewing from sewing clothes on their dolls. This doll is made from the bark of the palm tree. These dolls here are Seminole dolls. The first dolls I showed you are made from the husk of the corn husk dolls. When the boys got married to the girls, they had to leave their village and find their wives in different villages because the girls in their home village were their cousins. So when they found their wife in a new village, they would go there to live, making the women the keepers or the owners of the homes. In the eastern United States, we were matriarchal. Boys played games that taught them things too. They had to learn how to carve things out of wood to make toys. Learning to carve things like this taught them how to carve big canoes and wooden bows and other things out of wood they would need later. Games like marbles taught us aiming skills since we were little toddlers. And games like the chunky stone rolled down the field with the boys lined up with arrows trying to hit it to get a point, taught them aiming skills at a very young age. When the boys got started in their hunting, it was not out in the woods, it was in the garden where the village elders can keep an eye on them. Their job was to hunt birds and squirrels and rabbits that's trying to eat up all of our crops out in the field. That food's our winter food that gets us through the winter, so protecting it was important. The boys would learn to make little bird whistles. These bird calls would later lead to the whistles and flutes that you see behind me. That's how flutes came about. It was bird calls that did it first. The girls also had to know how to use bows and arrows as well. You never know when the village might get overrun, and they had to help protect the village as well as sometimes put food on the table by hunting. The ball game, played by both men and women. When they played each other, it was sometimes just a fun game in the village. But when the men of the village played the men of another village, this game wasn't always played for fun. It was sometimes a substitute instead of fighting in a battle. The little brother of war was a nickname we called it. Ball game and stickball, that's just a general name. Today you might know the game as lacrosse, a name the French people gave it when they came to the Americas and saw tribes around the Great Lakes playing, and their stick was a lot bigger than these sticks. These sticks are our way of playing in the South, tribes like the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, and many other tribes of the Southeast. Our version was to use two sticks. Catch the ball, run with it, throw it downfield. You have to use the sticks, not your hands. So there's a lot of different variations of the game. The ball pole with the tall pole in the air, if you struck it higher up, you got more points than if you hit it lower. So these games will a lot of times determine the outcome of an argument. Maybe a village was arguing with another village over property lines or hunting grounds or things like that. So the ball game was a way of settling war between native peoples. 500 years ago, our whole world would change. As Europeans came across the ocean 500 years ago, they brought things with them that was completely devastating to the native people. First of all, sicknesses. Europeans had sicknesses that were never here in the Americas that the native body was not used to, and wiped out many of the original people all over the southeast and eastern United States within just a few years of sicknesses traveling from person to person. The Spanish brought many tools, horses, animals like pigs and cows, chickens. They brought things we'd never had here, guns. At first it was scary, but then when we saw what this gun could do, it was much better than a bow and arrow. And so we start wanting their things as well. The English, with their red coats, gave us the name the Creeks because we lived by the rivers and the creeks. They began trading with us a lot in Georgia. The French settled over into Alabama lands and traded with the tribes that way. And down in Spanish Florida, the old tribes were replaced by runaways, the Seminoles. As the Seminoles became the native people of Florida, they were a mixture of the old tribes and new tribes and slaves. They also started to experience this trade. The trade goods, they made our lives better. Who wants to use a clay cooking pot that breaks so easy when we can have a metal one that won't break at all? Who wants to use a rock when you can have metal? So the metal axes, the metal knives started to replace the stone tools. And of course the gun works much better than the bow and arrow, so that became a weapon we all wanted too. At first it was knowledge that they needed. They had no idea about this land, but the natives did. And so having us on their side was a good thing, as a guide or a scout, someone who showed their army the trails, someone who knew the language of another tribe we might be running into. And so we were used as knowledge. And pretty soon we would get something of theirs that we could carry back to our village, whether it be a gun or a nice warm, bright colored blanket. Native people love the bright colors, especially the shiny things. Check it out. Colonial sunglasses. This is what glasses were like back then. See there? What do you think? Imagine what natives thought when they saw things like these colonial shoes and mirrors or metal axes and swords and knives. We liked them. They worked pretty good. Show you something here. The beads were trade beads made of glass, like the ones you see back there. Some were big and some were very small. We could use those beads for our weaving and belts like the one you see here, the one I'm wearing across my chest. And also we would use those beads to make pouches like this bandolier bag, which is a copy of one that was worn by a great Seminole chief named Billy Bowlegs. This bag strap represents a rattlesnake's pattern on his back, and the flap represents the head of an alligator. Chief Billy Bowlegs' pouch. The trade goods, we liked them. And pretty soon we started getting these items in our villages, and they said to us, start trading us the skins of the animals, the furs, and the hides would now become money. And in America, when we call money a buck, it really goes back to the days when the skin was turned into leather. The buckskin, the boy deer, his skin was bigger and heavier, and that was the one that was traded. And so today, our money today, known as bucks, goes way back to these times. As time went on, our clothing would change from animal skins to cloth, shiny metals, glass beads. metal tools. Our weapons would change too. And in just a few generations, girls forgot how to make clay pots, and boys forgot how their grandpa chipped on the rocks and made the arrowheads. Now we have to keep on trading. When the deer were overhunted, native people started trading little bits of their lands away to pay off what they had owed to the English or to the French or whoever it may be. This allowed them to have more land and bring more people. And every time they brought more people in their boats, they needed more land. The boats would carry our deer skins back across the ocean, and there they would be very valuable. And so the animal skins was money, the land was valuable, and as the land became valuable, it allowed these European powers to grow to the point where we had trading posts set up even in our villages. The trade goods made our lives better, no doubt about that. Everyone wanted to live a better life, but within just a couple generations, no one could remember how their grandpa made an arrowhead or how their grandma made a clay cooking pot. We were no longer living off just nature. Now we were living off that trading post that was set up in our villages. A lot of the traders would marry native wives and have mixed blood children. But a lot of them wanted to go back to the old ways, but a lot of them wanted to stay in this new world of luxury with the bright colors and the comfortable things. This would lead to the Creek Wars, a division among the Creek Indians. The Creek Wars was a very sad time. The Americans finally came down and defeated the Red Stick Creeks and drove them into Florida. They became part of the Seminole people down there. But a lot of the natives would later fight again when Andrew Jackson wanted to move them out of their lands here in the Alabama territories and Georgia territories out to Oklahoma, where they were moving all the tribes to. Today, if you go to Oklahoma, there are 39 tribes out there. They were all tribes moved out to that territory with other tribes on their lands, and that became the land of the native people, Oklahoma. But there are still a few here in the east that never did get moved. They hid out, they fought back, and they never surrendered. And so I hope that by me sharing with you these stories of our old ways, you've got a better understanding of how native people were. The way I'm dressed here 200 years ago, back to thousands of years ago. But today, native people are just like everybody else. They have things just like you. They have homes, they go to schools, they work, and they do the same things that you do. And so we're people today just like everyone else. And so I hope you've had a great time sharing with me and learning with me today. Let's go fire off this musket and end the show with a big bang. There was nothing that changed our way of life probably any more than the gun. I've got lots of guns in there on display. Today I want to end our show by firing off this British musket. This is called a Brown Bess flintlock. Piece of flint hits the metal, makes a spark, and that's what lights the powder. The powder is kept in the horn, usually of a buffalo or a cow. The horn is nice and dry inside, so it keeps the powder dry, which is important. And it's also shaped like a funnel. Makes it easy to get the powder out. We're going to put a little bit of powder down the barrel. And if I was going to shoot a real bullet, well, I'd need something like this musket ball right there. The musket ball would be set in after the powder with a wadding and packed all the way to the bottom with a ramrod. The ramrod used to pack the ball or powder all the way down to the bottom. Once we've got it packed, now we've got to prime our gun and get it ready to fire. Right there's the flint, there's the steel. We're going to put a little bit of powder right there. When that powder gets lit, it lights the other powder inside the barrel through a hole, and that's what makes the gun fire. The gunpowder shooting off the bullet. Are you guys ready to end with a big bang? Here we go. Fire in the hole! How about that? Well, I hope you've had a good time learning today. I've had a great time sharing. Our tribes don't say goodbye. That kind of means forever. We hope to see each other someday. Hadam. Till we meet, Mado. Thank you very much.